They didn't see a threat. Not at first. Just a black woman in a first-class coat, too calm, too poised, too confident for where they thought she should be. That was enough. Before she even spoke, the whisper started. Gate agents shifting glances, flight crew tightening smiles, passengers clutching their assumptions a little closer. No alarms, no chaos. Just a quiet, calculated move to remove her. She didn't shout. She didn't resist. And that made it worse, because the system isn't built to handle dignity. What no one realized was they had just silenced the wrong woman. The same woman whose name once appeared on their own ethics briefings, whose warnings about algorithmic bias had been dismissed behind closed doors by the very people now labeling her a threat. What happened next would unmake careers, dismantle a billion-dollar operation, and force a nation to confront the digital face of modern discrimination. This isn't just a story, it's a reckoning. If you're watching this, hit like and subscribe. We're exposing every layer. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and tell us, what do you see when someone's confidence unsettles the system? Dr. Thalassa Monroe knew exactly who she was and what she had earned. Her heels clicked with quiet power against the polished floor of Chicago O'Hare as she approached the gate for Flight 297. The plum coat she wore was tailored and precise, her smoke gray pantsuit crisp beneath it. Her face was composed, her eyes sharp, and her steps measured with the confidence of a woman who had negotiated billion-dollar deals and outmaneuvered some of the country's most cutthroat corporate minds. Her boarding pass read first class, C2A. Yet, as she approached the scanner, a male TSA agent leaned toward his colleague and whispered something. The female agent's eyes flicked to Thalassa, then back to her screen. "Hold up a moment, please," she said, her tone too careful. Thalassa raised an eyebrow, but said nothing as they scanned her ID again. She had seen this before. She heard it too, 3 muttered words between the agents. Visual discrepancy alert. The implication was clear. She didn't look the part. After a tense minute and a forced smile, they handed her documents back. "All set. Thank you for your patience." She said nothing, only gave a slight nod and walked toward the jet bridge. The first-class cabin exuded quiet opulence, cream leather seats, soft golden lights, hushed tones. Thalassa moved with elegance, placing her carry-on into the overhead bin. Her seat, 2A, was waiting, pillow fluffed, water glass set. But as she sat, a hum of discomfort rippled through the cabin. A woman in 1B pulled her handbag closer. A man in 2C lowered his phone and stared. Then came the flight attendant. She was tall, with perfectly manicured nails and a badge reading H. Ramsey. Her smile looked like it had been stapled in place. "Ma'am, can I help you?" she asked, pausing beside Thalassa's seat. Thalassa looked up. "No, thank you. I'm in 2. Do you have your boarding pass?" Ramsey's voice remained syrupy, but there was tension beneath it. Thalassa handed it over without flinching. Ramsey studied it longer than necessary, her eyes scanning the screen, then darting back to Thalassa's face. "Right this way," she finally said, stepping aside, but her smile had faded. Thalassa settled into her seat, pulled out her tablet, and focused on a report. She felt their eyes, their judgment, their discomfort with her existence in this space. Then Ramsey reappeared 5 minutes later, clipboard in hand. "Dr. Monroe," she said with mock professionalism, "there's been a minor issue with your seating. Would you mind stepping aside while we sort it out?" Thalassa slowly looked up. "What kind of issue?" Ramsey paused. "We believe it's a booking error. Nothing serious. We just need to confirm a few things." This wasn't the first time. She could feel it again, the quiet shaming, the displacement masked as policy. Passengers watched her stand and follow Ramsey toward the galley. "We're going to temporarily reseat you," Ramsey said without apology. "Where?" Thalassa asked. Ramsey hesitated. "Rear cabin." "You mean economy," Thalassa clarified. Ramsey avoided her gaze. "Just for now. Is my ticket invalid?" "We're sorting it out. Thank you for your cooperation." No explanation, no confrontation, just public degradation. She was escorted to row 31, a cramped middle seat between a coughing teenager and a sweating man with no concept of personal space. Her briefcase was forced into the overhead bin. No offer of help. No drink. No compensation. Nothing. She sat rigid, silent, her fists clenched in her lap as the engines roared to life. Around her, flight attendants avoided her row like it was radioactive. The man in 31C was already snoring. The man to her left had fallen asleep with his mouth open, snoring and exhaling warm air that smelled of stale coffee and onion crackers, while the toddler behind her kicked rhythmically at her seatback, as if playing percussion in a band Thalassa never wanted to hear. She said nothing. She endured. She always endured. But endurance did not mean immunity. It meant carrying the insult like a branding iron pressed to the soul, and every second that passed branded her deeper. The injustice of it gnawed beneath her calm exterior like termites behind polished wood. The plane had not yet taken off. A mechanical issue, the pilot said. Routine delay, he claimed over the intercom. But Thalassa felt the shift. She sensed the tension creep back in. Flight attendants grew stiff. The tone of conversation dropped. Whispers passed between crew in the galley like rumors in a prison yard. Then came the unmistakable hush that falls over a crowd when something has gone horribly wrong. A murmur swept down the aisle. Eyes turned again not toward a general disturbance, but specifically, undeniably, toward her. The aisle cleared. She didn't need to look up. She could hear the heavy, synchronized footfalls of authority moving down the fuselage. 2 TSA agents entered the cabin, followed by a man in uniform. Air marshal or captain, she couldn't tell. Their eyes scanned the rows, and when they reached hers, they stopped. The lead officer, a white man with a clipped mustache and the scent of vinegar and starch wafting from his uniform, leaned toward her with the mock politeness of a predator. "Dr. Monroe," he said too loudly, "we need you to come with us immediately." She didn't respond right away. She stared at him, letting silence speak louder than outrage. "Is there a reason?" she asked evenly, her voice quiet but unflinching. "For security purposes," he replied. "We've been asked to escort you for further screening. The captain has ordered a safety reassignment." There it was. Safety reassignment. Not protocol, not procedure, just a manufactured euphemism to cloak racism in bureaucracy. She stood, gathered her briefcase with slow precision, and followed them. The passengers didn't speak, but she could hear their thoughts in every sideways glance, every narrowed eye. Must have done something. I knew it. They wouldn't remove her without a reason. Down the aisle, past business class, back into the terminal. They didn't take her to a lounge or a holding room. They led her to a maintenance corridor behind the jet bridge, concrete walls, flickering overhead lights, the distant groan of HVAC systems. She was told to place her briefcase on the ground. Then they told her to kneel. At first, she didn't understand. She blinked. "Kneel?" she asked. The officer repeated himself. "For safety, we need you to kneel while the K9 unit conducts a sweep." The absurdity of it snapped something in her chest. "You want me to kneel in a hallway like I'm a criminal because your system randomly picked me?" she said, her tone still level, but burning now with disbelief. He didn't respond. Instead, he waved over a third officer who unclipped a leash. The dog, a large, tense German shepherd, snarled as it approached. Thalassa dropped to one knee, not because she felt guilt or fear, because she had calculated the consequences of resistance, and even her pride had limits. She knelt on the filthy concrete, the hem of her pants soaking up something damp and sour-smelling. The dog circled her, sniffing, its handler silent. A fourth officer filmed the entire ordeal on a body cam. But that wasn't the only camera. She saw a phone out of a corner of her eye. Someone across the corridor had their phone raised, capturing every humiliating second as if it were a spectacle for likes and comments. No one intervened. No one objected. No one questioned whether it was necessary. After several agonizing minutes, the dog barked once and was pulled back. "Clear," the handler muttered. Still no apology, no explanation, just the word "clear," as if that erased the shame. Thalassa stood, brushing the grit from her palms. "Am I free to go?" she asked. The lead officer nodded, as if granting a favor rather than returning stolen dignity. You can return to the gate, but you've been rebooked. You'll be on the next flight, 3 hours from now. She stared at him. Rebooked. He didn't look up. Captain's discretion. She gathered her things in silence, walked back through the terminal where no one made eye contact, returned to the same gate where the staff now avoided her completely. Her seat had been reassigned, her ticket invalidated, her presence erased. 3 hours. 3 hours of silence, of invisible stares, of internal screams. She sat by the window and watched the very plane she had boarded taxi away, taking off into the clouds without her. Flight 297 disappeared into the sky, carrying passengers who never questioned why she had been removed, why she had been flagged, why it was always people like her. She remained still, lips pressed shut, the storm inside her thickening with every second. But silence, she knew, didn't equal invisibility. She would soon realize just how visible she had become. The image came first. A blurry photo, grainy but unmistakable. Her plum coat, her knee against the stained floor. Her expression unreadable, but clearly composed. The caption read, "Breaking. Woman detained at O'Hare after refusing crew orders. Passenger posed potential threat, sources say." Within 20 minutes, it had over 18,000 shares on a third-tier travel blog. Within 2 hours, it had hit the homepage of a national tabloid. But it wasn't just the headline, it was the comments. Typical. Bet she pulled the race card. Should have flown coach like the rest of them. The venom came fast, unfiltered, and relentless. Thalassa didn't know her image had gone viral until her assistant, Chloe, texted, "They're dragging you online. Don't look, but it's bad." She looked anyway. The airline had released a statement, a short, antiseptic paragraph designed to sound neutral, but crafted to cast guilt. Earlier today, Flight 297 experienced a security alert involving a non-compliant passenger. In accordance with FAA guidelines, crew acted to ensure the safety of all on board. The passenger was reassigned to a later flight. "We regret any inconvenience." Non-compliant. That was the word, the scarlet letter, the weaponized language corporations used when they wanted plausible deniability. There was no mention of her name, no acknowledgement of her ticket, her rights, or the indignity she endured. Just the implication that she had done something wrong. And that was enough. News anchors speculated on morning shows. Social media influencers debated her in threads filled with bad faith arguments. One popular YouTuber joked, "If she's a doctor, then I'm an astronaut," as he laughed into the camera. The clip got nearly 1 million views in less than 4 hours. Thalassa didn't respond. She kept her hands still in her lap. She didn't clench her fists, didn't cry, didn't break. But inside her, something had shifted permanently. It wasn't just public humiliation, it was public gaslighting. The erasure of truth in real time. She boarded her rescheduled flight with no further incident. Now seated in the last row near the bathroom, the air stale, the seat stuck in an upright position. No one spoke to her, not even Tanisha, the flight attendant who had tried to show kindness earlier. That silence spoke louder than words. When she landed in San Francisco, it was late. Her phone buzzed with 100 missed calls, dozens of emails, and one alert that made her stomach turn. Her upgraded seat, 2A, the one she had paid for in full with her own executive account, had been given away. That she expected. But who received it sent her blood cold. A teenage influencer, known online as Lyric Blaze, had tweeted a smiling selfie in first class, reclined in the plush leather, sipping orange juice and captioning it, "When you're upgraded last minute, 'cause you need to vlog the whole flight for your followers. Shout out to the airline crew for the hookup. Hashtag blessed, hashtag first class life." The post had over 200,000 likes. Comments under her tweet praised her luck, while others speculated she'd been gifted the seat as a promo deal. No one asked why the original passenger had been removed. No one cared. Thalassa stared at the image of the girl in her seat, in her space, living her comfort, sipping her drink, while she, Thalassa, had been strip-mined of dignity and painted as a threat. She closed her phone and sat alone in the corner of the arrivals terminal. She didn't hail a car, didn't call a friend. She just sat, eyes open, staring into the indifferent swirl of travelers flowing around her. Everyone moving, everyone blind. Chloe picked her up eventually, drove her in silence, saying nothing until they reached Thalassa's condo. There, Chloe paused and finally asked the question no one else had dared. "Why aren't you saying anything?" Thalassa turned slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, but laced with steel. "Because I'm watching." "Watching what?" Chloe asked. "The pattern," Thalassa replied. "The machine. How they do it. How they twist, erase, and replace." "So what now?" Chloe's voice cracked slightly. "What do you do after this?" Thalassa looked out the window at the San Francisco skyline. "I remember," she said. "I gather. I calculate. And when the moment is right, I answer." She went upstairs without another word. In her private study, she opened her laptop and began compiling files, boarding passes, receipts, email confirmations, screenshots, timestamps, and the video footage a stranger had posted of her kneeling in that corridor. She downloaded it all. She backed up every file twice. She opened a fresh document and titled it Statement of Facts. She didn't plan to make noise. Not yet. She planned to build a timeline so complete, so irrefutable, that not even the most seasoned corporate PR department could spin it. They had lied. The public had mocked her. She had built her life on proof, not presumption. And now she was assembling a case with the same precision she once used to dismantle monopolies. The file grew thicker with each passing hour. Metadata from her boarding pass, transaction records, flight logs, airline policies, internal FAA rules. Every possible discrepancy she could expose, she cataloged. But she didn't stop there. She began contacting every single passenger she could identify from the flight. Some responded with generic apologies. Others ignored her completely. But one, a tech consultant named Aryan Shah, offered more than regret. He offered a thread. Aryan had flown out of habit, not purpose. But he had noticed the odd way Thalassa was treated before she was removed. And more importantly, his tech background had taught him where to look when something didn't add up. With her consent, he used his access to a private developer network to probe the flight's back-end reservation logs. What he found confirmed what Thalassa had always suspected. Internal tags next to her reservation code labeled her as alert flagged, mismatch profile. There was no security breach, no behavioral incident, no violation of policy. The sole basis for the flag had been an algorithmic marker set to highlight visual discrepancies between name, profile history, and expected travel behavior. In layman's terms, her crime had been existing in a space they didn't think she belonged. Thalassa stared at the screen, rereading the code tag a dozen times. She already knew it, but seeing it made it real. Her humiliation hadn't been an accident. It had been protocol. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she asked Aryan to send her everything he could find and not tell anyone about their communication. He agreed. Within a day, Thalassa had full access to a hidden stream of internal emails between gate agents, flight crew, and operations supervisors. The first email came 6 hours before her boarding. Passenger Monroe flagged. High-risk probability. Possible seating reassignment. Another followed 3 hours later. First-class optics concern. Recommend bumping. And then, the damning exchange minutes before she was escorted from the aircraft. Better safe than viral. Move her. She doesn't scan clean for first. Followed by a laughing emoji. Thalassa stared at the screen, the bile rising in her throat. These weren't mistakes. These were premeditated decisions, discussed casually among professionals who had played God with her dignity. Chloe read the messages over her shoulder and gasped. They're admitting to it on their own system. But Thalassa didn't gasp. She nodded. They've done this before, she whispered. I'm just the one who's going to end it. But she knew they wouldn't go down easily. And she was right. The next day, she filed a Freedom of Information Act request for the gate and boarding surveillance footage. Within hours, she received a response. Unfortunately, the relevant video files are unavailable due to a technical malfunction in the data server. It was a lie, obvious and immediate. Surveillance systems for international hubs, like O'Hare, were redundantly backed up. For the system to lose footage from only the exact window of her boarding was statistically improbable, if not laughable. They had deleted it, scrubbed it, covered it. She sat in her condo that night, the windows shut, lights dimmed, laptop humming, and felt that rare flicker of rage shift into something more volatile, certainty. The airline hadn't just dismissed her. They had conspired to erase her. But then something unexpected happened. At 3:41 in the morning, her phone buzzed. A blocked number. A single message. No words, just a file. Gated 7_CCTV_0735.mp4. She hesitated only a second before transferring the file to her hard drive. The video opened, grainy but clear. The date matched. The time stamp confirmed. She watched herself approach the gate, still upright, still composed. She saw the two agents whisper, saw the man nod, saw her flagged without cause. The footage zoomed slightly as she was handed her boarding pass back, and the agent whispered something into a walkie. She boarded the plane, unaware she had been marked. Another segment showed the moment they pulled her off. A crew member nodded to the security team before they approached. There had been no panic, no escalation, no risk. Just silent coordination and a calculated takedown. The video closed with an image of her coat disappearing into the back corridor. She sat back in her chair, silent. She didn't know who sent the footage or why, but someone on the inside had watched and made a choice. She replayed the file, then saved 3 copies and stored them in encrypted drives. The next day, she booked a meeting with a civil rights attorney known for his work in aviation discrimination. She didn't walk into the office as a victim. She walked in as a plaintiff. When he asked her what her claim was, she opened her laptop and played the footage. He didn't speak until the end. Then he said, "We're going to own that airline." A respected journalist from an independent media site picked it up, posted a detailed breakdown of the timestamps, the crew's coordinated actions, the obvious lack of threat from Thalassa, and the cold, mechanical process with which she had been pulled from the plane. Supporters rallied to her defense on social platforms, calling for boycotts, demanding apologies, and tagging the airline sponsors in droves. Hashtags like hashtag kneeling at gate D7 and hashtag Monroe deserves justice trended for 3 days straight. But in the shadow of that wave came the undertow. The backlash no one wanted to admit still thrived in boardrooms and back channels. Thalassa received her first call from the investor group the following Monday morning. It was routine at first, a quarterly update scheduled weeks in advance. But 5 minutes in, the tone shifted. The senior partner, a man who once praised her strategy as a masterclass in executive acumen, suddenly referred to the recent media frenzy as a distraction. When she corrected him and said, "It's a civil rights violation," he sighed audibly and said, "It's still noise. Investors are risk-averse, and your name's in the headlines for all the wrong reasons." She knew what was coming before he said it. "We're pulling out. The board voted this morning. The $300 million round is frozen indefinitely." She didn't yell. She didn't plead. She simply thanked him and ended the call. But as she sat alone in her office, the silence wasn't empty. It was pressure, cold and deliberate, building in her chest like rising water. The message was clear. Her pain was a liability. Her truth was too expensive. She turned back to her files. She still had the video, the emails, the booking logs, and now a spreadsheet of every internal tag used by the airline's profiling algorithm, including dozens of other passengers who had been quietly reassigned, delayed, or bumped without explanation. The class action angle was starting to take shape, and with every data point she uncovered, her resolve hardened. But then the threats began. The first came by email. No subject line, no sender information. Just one sentence typed in all caps. "Drop it or you'll wish you had." She deleted it. The second came the next day, a package delivered to her office. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with her own photograph printed on it, a still from the leaked footage of her kneeling. Across the image, written in red marker, "Stay in your lane." That night, she had her building install new security cameras. Chloe stayed over without asking, her presence quiet but watchful. The third message came by phone, a voice scrambled by distortion. "You're stirring a pot you can't control," it said. "Back off. Or next time, it won't just be your career that gets grounded." She recorded it, saved it, and forwarded it to her lawyer. But she didn't flinch. She had faced mergers designed to swallow her whole. She had stared down patent wars and market collapses. And now, she was staring down something darker, an institutional reflex to destroy what it could not control. She knew what she was doing posed a threat, not just to a single airline, but to a system of silent profiling and economic gatekeeping. And the system was pushing back. But what it didn't know, what it couldn't understand, was that Thalassa Monroe was not made of breakable things. The next morning, she held a press conference. A modest space, no grand stage. Just a podium, her laptop, and a room of 30 reporters with questions ready to pierce. She stood calm, composed, and open with a statement that froze the room. "I am not here to be pitted. I am not here for apology. I am here to confirm that the airline in question knowingly, willingly, and repeatedly violated my civil rights and the rights of others through a discriminatory system hidden behind algorithmic policy." She played the video. She displayed the email logs. She read the quotes aloud. She listed every instance of profiling backed by her data. The room erupted in questions, cameras flashing, pens scribbling, but she didn't flinch. She answered every inquiry with the precision of a litigator. And then she said, "They told me I didn't belong in first class, that I didn't look like I should be there. They made that decision before I even stepped on the plane. So I'm not just suing for myself. I'm suing for every name tagged as suspicious without cause. I'm suing to dismantle the assumption." The story exploded again, but this time with more clarity, more urgency. Civil rights leaders called. Attorneys volunteered. A former employee from the airline reached out, offering testimony. But even as her allies grew, the threats escalated. Her apartment was broken into. Nothing stolen, just a mess made of her personal files. Her name was added to a forum watch list for corporate agitators. But Thalassa moved forward undeterred. Every time they tried to isolate her, she responded by going more public. She posted documents. She posted updates. She showed her face and spoke with the certainty of someone who had already seen the worst and survived it. In private, she documented every threat, every canceled deal, every attempt to force her silence. Chloe kept a backup drive in a separate location. Aryan, the tech consultant, offered digital security for her servers. And her attorney filed paperwork for a class action suit involving 97 other plaintiffs who had come forward with eerily similar stories. The footage had opened the wound. The class action suit had driven in the scalpel. Now the system was bleeding, and the men who had built it wanted nothing more than to sew it shut by force. Her legal team had grown to 5 all-sharp, principled professionals with experience in class action litigation and civil rights. Together, they were preparing a devastating case built not only on what had happened to her, but on what had been happening for years to people who lacked her reach, her profile, her resources. 97 plaintiffs and counting had come forward, each bearing their own stories of subtle reassignments, unexplained delays, downgrades, interrogations, and denials, all with one thing in common. Their profiles had been labeled incongruent, unverified, or potential risk by the airline's proprietary algorithm. Thalassa's team had evidence, but they needed more. They needed something undeniable, something so explosive that no court could ignore it. No jury could rationalize it away. And that piece came from an unexpected source, a co-defendant who had once worked in the airline's internal risk department and who now, under subpoena, agreed to testify. His name was Eamon Cross, a systems compliance manager who had spent 8 years quietly maintaining the software that sorted passengers behind the scenes. He had kept his mouth shut through countless internal reviews, had watched as passengers were flagged and removed without justification, and had told himself it wasn't his fault. He just maintained the system. But when he saw Thalassa's story and the footage, something in him broke. His first deposition was cautious, but by the third, he was naming names. And then he dropped the bombshell. A confidential program called Ejects, a covert internal database designed to pre-flag anomalous passenger profiles based on travel patterns, spending history, digital presence, and most controversially, biometric data, including facial analysis. The algorithm had been programmed with a weighted scale that disproportionately flagged passengers based on skin tone, income bracket, and zip code. In short, it was digital redlining disguised as security. Thalassa sat across from him during a closed-door session, her attorney silent, the stenographer capturing every word. Eamon's voice was low, but clear as he said, "We were told to protect the company image, to make sure first class didn't look confrontational." That was the word they used, confrontational appearance. We called it optics control. He didn't need to explain further. It was the smoking gun, and it would be central to the lawsuit. Word of the testimony leaked within days. The airline issued an immediate denial, calling Eamon a disgruntled former employee and accusing Thalassa's legal team of weaponizing incomplete information. But it was too late. The court had the documents. The press had the quotes. And now the public had a name for what was happening: Ejects. The blowback was swift. Stock prices dipped. Protesters began assembling at major airports. Legislators from 3 states called for federal investigations. But with every headline that seemed to bring justice closer, Thalassa found her personal world becoming more fragile, more volatile. The threat level had escalated. One night, after a late meeting with her attorneys, she exited the downtown parking garage and found her car sitting lower than usual. At first, she thought it was a trick of a light, but as she approached, the truth became clear. 2 of her tires had been slashed, the rubber still curling at the edges. And etched into the driver's side door in deep, uneven lines were 5 chilling words: "Your silence was safer." She didn't scream. She didn't call Chloe. She just took out her phone, snapped a photo, then another, then opened her notes app and added a timestamp. Only then did she report it. The police came, took a statement, filed a report. But she could see it in their eyes, the assumption that she had made enemies, that she had drawn attention, that this came with the territory. They didn't say it, but they didn't need to. She knew how they thought. After they left, she stood beside the damaged car in the shadowed garage and stared at her own reflection in the cracked mirror of the side panel. This was what they wanted: to break her rhythm, to make her hesitate, to convince her that safety lived only in submission. But the only thing she felt now was more certain than ever. Fear had stopped working on her. It had become background noise, like static on a dead frequency, and she would not change the channel. The next morning, she held another press briefing, not to discuss the damage to her car, not to respond to the latest slander by the airline's legal team, but to release a statement from an anonymous former executive who had chosen to come forward with internal memos about Ejects' development. The memo, marked confidential, listed a series of targeted risk profiles the system had been trained on, including a line that read, "Black female professionals traveling first class without corporate booking history. Medium-high anomaly score." That phrase, now public, sent shockwaves through the media. It was not just racial profiling. It was racial profiling with corporate logic, sanitized by data, enforced by silence. Her attorney read the memo aloud, then announced that they would be filing an additional federal complaint citing violation of the Civil Rights Act, biometric abuse under the Illinois Biometric Information Privacy Act, and multiple counts of fraud and defamation. The room was silent. Then came the flood of questions. But Thalassa had said what she needed to say. She left the podium, walked past the cameras, and out into the street where protesters now held signs with her name, demanding justice not only for her, but for all those the system had quietly erased. Thalassa Monroe sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by her legal team. She wore a navy suit, minimalist but sharp, her face composed, unreadable. Across from her, the airline's defense looked polished, confident, whispering among themselves. They had filed motion after motion to stall the proceedings, to get her testimony thrown out, to question the validity of the leaked footage, to suppress the whistleblower evidence. They had failed. The judge, an older woman with a no-nonsense tone and a reputation for intolerance toward evasive litigation. had cleared the way for full proceedings. And now, it was Thalassa's turn to take a stand. She rose slowly, walked to the witness box with poise, and raised her right hand. After swearing in, she sat, looked once at the jury, then locked eyes with the defense team for a fraction of a second. The lead attorney smirked. That would be the last time he smiled. The plaintiff's counsel began with basic questions: name, profession, travel date, seat assignment. Thalassa answered clearly, articulately, offering no emotional inflection. But then the line of questioning shifted. Dr. Monroe, would you please describe your area of professional expertise for the record? She nodded. I am a senior ethics researcher specializing in artificial intelligence, algorithmic accountability, and data bias in predictive models. I hold a PhD in cognitive systems from Stanford, a master's in applied mathematics from Brown, and an undergraduate degree in computer science from MIT. There was a collective rustle of surprise in the gallery. Even the jury blinked. The defense attorney's pen stilled. But she wasn't finished. I have worked with federal advisory boards on AI legislation, advised the European Union's Ethics Commission on biometric surveillance, and formally consulted with Fortune 100 corporations on the ethical integration of AI into commercial infrastructure. The plaintiff's counsel stepped forward. Have you ever worked with this airline before? A pause. Yes, she said. 3 years ago, I was contracted as a consultant to review and audit a set of behavioral prediction tools they were planning to integrate into their customer profiling systems. A wave of whispers swept the room. The attorney raised a hand for quiet, then continued. To clarify, are you saying you were involved in the early analysis of the very algorithm that eventually flagged you? I was involved in its proposed framework, she confirmed. At the time, the airline's internal team presented a prototype of a model that would use facial recognition and spending patterns to generate risk scores. I raised immediate red flags about racial and socioeconomic bias. I submitted a 117-page report citing statistical vulnerabilities, ethical red lines, and legal liabilities. What was their response? She turned her gaze toward the defense table. They ignored the recommendations. In fact, during a private executive session, I was told my concerns were alarmist and unmarketable. And then, I resigned from the project and terminated the contract. The jury leaned forward. The courtroom had gone completely still. Dr. Monroe, the attorney said, "Do you recall who specifically dismissed your report?" Her voice didn't change. Yes, the current chief data officer, the director of predictive analytics, and the head of security integration, all of whom are still employed by the airline. The defense scrambled, papers shuffled, a whispered objection raised, overruled by the judge. Thalassa's voice was now the only one that mattered. The plaintiff's counsel clicked a remote, and the monitor lit up with a document: Internal Ethics Review, Predictive Passenger Profiling System, Summary of Findings by Dr. T. Monroe, dated 3 years prior. Her signature at the bottom. This is your report? Yes. And did it contain a warning that the proposed system could result in racial profiling under the guise of security metrics? It did, repeatedly. And were you paid for this work? I was paid for the initial phase. I waived the remainder of my contract to distance myself from the implementation phase. The jury watched wide-eyed. The public had known Thalassa Monroe as the woman in the plum coat, the professional traveler ejected without cause, the activist who sued. Now they were seeing her true identity, the expert who had seen the storm before it arrived, who had tried to stop it, and who had been ignored, only to become its victim. When the defense cross-examined, their strategy crumbled quickly. They tried to paint her as disgruntled, but her credentials were irrefutable. They tried to suggest her removal had nothing to do with Prismex, but the leaked documents and Eamon's testimony had already tied her profile flag directly to that system. They implied her lawsuit was self-serving, but the dozens of other plaintiffs behind her, many now watching from the gallery, made that argument laughable. And when they suggested she had leaked the video footage herself, she calmly stated, "No, I did not, but I'm grateful someone with a conscience did." After hours of questioning, she stepped down from the stand and returned to her seat. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. They didn't cheer. They stood in quiet solidarity, holding signs, some with her quotes, others with faces of different victims who had never gotten their day in court. She looked over them briefly, then disappeared into a waiting car. That evening, the major news networks broadcast clips from the trial. Legal analysts called her testimony devastating, bulletproof, and historical. Social media erupted. Law schools assigned the case to civil rights classes. Politicians began drafting new guidelines for algorithmic transparency. The airline's PR department went silent, and in an emergency meeting leaked 2 days later, board members could be heard discussing resignation strategies. But Thalassa didn't slow down. Her team continued to build, to publish, to expose. The world had begun to pay attention not just to the story of a black woman wrongfully removed from her seat, but to the vast digital machinery designed to make that erasure normal, invisible, and defensible. And as attention grew, so did support. Donations flooded the legal aid fund. Whistleblowers sent encrypted files. And among the most explosive was a message from a journalist working for a major national newspaper, one with sources deep inside the airline's corporate ranks. The journalist, Ava Green, had been following the case from the beginning, but only recently had she received a cache of internal documentation leaked by a disillusioned HR analyst. The files, nearly a gigabyte of scanned memos, staff logs, and testing protocols, exposed the full depth of the airline's systemic abuse. In a front-page article published across the nation, Ava wrote, "Internal documents reveal PrismX was not only deployed externally on passengers, but tested secretly on minority employees during internal flight drills labeled optics trials." Thalassa read the article in one sitting, her hands trembling not with shock, but fury. The airline hadn't just allowed its algorithm to profile passengers. It had refined its targeting by experimenting on its own staff, specifically Black and Latino employees assigned travel during company drills. One internal memo noted, "Monitor passenger response to unexpected presence of non-white staff in first-class trial zones. Log shifts in behavioral optics." Another, marked confidential, described a tolerance threshold test, where the presence of racially diverse employees in luxury cabins was measured against customer satisfaction surveys. Thalassa's breath caught at the language. It wasn't just discrimination. It was clinical, codified, institutional dehumanization. Within hours, the article spread across every major outlet. The airline issued a tepid denial, claiming the data had been misinterpreted, but no one bought it. Even former corporate allies began to distance themselves, issuing vague statements of concern. Meanwhile, Thalassa responded not with another press conference, but with action. She released her full 117-page ethics report, the one originally dismissed by the airline's board, on a public transparency website. Alongside it, she uploaded a curated dataset of every known case where passengers had been reassigned, delayed, or flagged under suspicious criteria. The database included entries for judges, decorated veterans, senior executives, and even 2 off-duty federal agents. Every entry included timestamps, seating assignments, and the flag reason used by the algorithm. It was damning, irrefutable, unforgivable. That evening, Thalassa gave a virtual keynote for a global tech ethics summit. Her voice, steady but hard, reached an audience of over 200,000 viewers. "We are living through a digital civil rights crisis," she said. "Our identities are being filtered through bias code, built by teams who never considered people like us to be part of their equation. PrismX is not unique. It is simply the most exposed." She paused. "I did not want to become a symbol. I wanted to travel with dignity. But now I understand being visible is my power." The response was immediate. Legal think tanks published white papers calling for urgent regulation. Federal agencies launched inquiries. Congress scheduled hearings. The airline CEO canceled a planned appearance at an investor summit. The PrismX scandal was no longer a headline, it was a reckoning. And yet, even as public pressure surged, the airline fought back behind the scenes. Their attorneys filed emergency motions to seal the report, claiming it contained proprietary data. The court denied them. They attempted to subpoena Thalassa's communications, accusing her of orchestrating leaks. The judge dismissed it as intimidation, but the most desperate move came in the form of a bribe. A private intermediary approached Thalassa's legal counsel with an offer: 8 figures in settlement, immediate apology, and full corporate rebranding, all contingent on her dropping the lawsuit and agreeing to a lifetime NDA. When the offer reached her, Thalassa didn't laugh. She didn't shout. She simply said, "Tell them no one can pay me to unlive what they did." Her team declined the offer, filed the exchange in court as further evidence of corporate misconduct, and pushed forward. The next week, a second whistleblower came forward, a former marketing executive who confirmed the existence of internal slide decks where diversity was discussed not as value, but as market disruption. The deck included visual heat maps showing customer discomfort when seated near unexpected profiles, a phrase used repeatedly to justify downgrades. Thalassa added it to the record. Her case now supported by 206 documented instances of discriminatory seating algorithms. The court date for closing arguments was set, and in the lead-up, support swelled beyond prediction. Athletes wore her name on wristbands. Celebrities tweeted quotes from her testimony. Civil rights organizations began petitioning for legislative change. And across the country, people who had long felt invisible began speaking up. But through it all, Thalassa remained centered, not distracted by praise or threats. She knew the battle wasn't just in court. It was in the culture, the mindset, the boardrooms where decisions were made based not on law, but perception. Inside, Thalassa Monroe sat still, her eyes trained on the 12 jurors who held not just her future, but the dignity of every name in her database in their hands. Her attorney, a civil rights veteran with decades in the field, delivered the final words like a scalpel, measured, precise, unflinching. He didn't appeal to emotion. He didn't ask for sympathy. He asked for accountability. "You saw the footage," he said. "You read the emails. You heard their own words used against them. This wasn't one mistake. This was a system built to profile, to exclude, and to humiliate under the pretense of security." He turned toward the jury and said, "Today, you are not just deciding a verdict. You are defining a standard." The defense followed with a flat, almost mechanical rebuttal, claiming corporate oversight, unintended bias, and data misinterpretation. They tried to cast Thalassa as a disruptor, someone who weaponized her knowledge for a vendetta. But the jury didn't seem to buy it. Their eyes stayed locked on the plaintiff's table, rarely shifting. After both sides rested, the judge issued instructions and sent them into deliberation. No one expected a fast decision. The case was too large, the implications too vast. But the jury returned in less than 5 hours. The courtroom filled as word spread. Thalassa sat silently, Chloe beside her, Aryen a few rows behind. The judge took the bench. The foreperson stood. "We, the jury, find the defendant liable on all counts." There was no cheer, no outburst, just a wave of air sucked from the room, followed by stunned silence. The judge turned to the jury. "And your determination for damages?" The foreperson read from the slip. "We award Dr. Thalassa Monroe and the plaintiff class a total sum of $2,700,000,000. This includes direct damages, punitive damages, and the establishment of a restitution fund for all verified affected parties." Gasps echoed across the room. Even seasoned reporters blinked in disbelief. This was not just a victory, it was seismic. It was a financial hammer blow designed not just to punish, but to re-engineer. The judge banged the gavel once and declared court adjourned. The moment Thalassa stood, 100 cameras outside the building went live. She walked out into the daylight without raising a fist, without offering a triumphant smile. She had not come for vengeance. She had come for truth. Reporters screamed questions. Supporters wept. Protesters cheered. But Thalassa simply walked through them all, her mind already moving to the next phase. Behind the scenes, the judgment triggered a chain reaction. The Department of Justice, already monitoring the trial's progress, launched a formal investigation into corporate misconduct. Within days, subpoenas were issued. Executives scrambled. But the real bombshell came during a post-trial deposition when a third whistleblower, an IT systems analyst, admitted under oath that he had been ordered to delete archived email threads and surveillance backups once the case went public. He named 3 senior executives who had given the order. The court unsealed the testimony. Federal prosecutors moved fast. Within 72 hours, multiple top-level executives, including the chief data officer, head of legal affairs, and vice president of risk operations, were indicted on charges of conspiracy to obstruct justice, evidence tampering, and civil rights violations. The arrests were televised. The mugshots plastered across networks. The stock price fell by 61% in a single week. The airline's board announced an emergency restructuring. Several sponsors withdrew funding. Travel forums erupted with boycott pledges. And for the first time, shareholders filed their own class action suit against the company's leadership, citing gross negligence and failure to disclose internal liabilities. But amid the chaos, Thalassa remained still. She made no victory lap. She declined interviews. She focused instead on the victims. With her share of the damages, she established the PRISM Accountability Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to algorithmic ethics, legal defense for those profiled by machine learning systems, and policy development for transparent data usage in corporate governance. She recruited data scientists, lawyers, and civil rights activists. She hosted forums, trained corporate ethicists, and advised universities. What had begun as a deeply personal act of survival had now become a sweeping mission of structural change. But not everyone who had harmed her would face courtrooms. Some had simply watched, participated passively, or benefited from the system's cruelty in silence. And now, those people began coming forward too, not with defenses, but apologies. Emails arrived, handwritten letters, anonymous confessions. Former staffers, security personnel, even the influencer who'd been gifted her seat wrote to say, "I was part of it. I see it now." Thalassa didn't respond to all of them, but when she did, it was always the same. Justice is not a weapon. It's a mirror. Use it well. In time, other airlines announced internal audits. Corporations reviewed their AI systems. And the government introduced the Monroe Algorithmic Rights Act, mandating transparency and third-party auditing of any automated system used for consumer profiling in transportation, finance, and housing. Thalassa testified in support of the bill. Her words that day would be archived in the congressional record. "I did not win today," she said. "We corrected something that should never have happened." The victory belongs to every name that system tried to erase. As she stepped down, applause broke the chamber's silence. In the weeks following the landmark verdict, as the news cycle gradually shifted its fevered spotlight onto new disasters, Thalassa Monroe remained a central figure not because she sought the attention, but because the world had finally realized the depth of what she had uncovered. Laws were changing, policies rewritten, and the term PRISMX became shorthand for digital discrimination across industries. In interviews and op-eds, technologists referenced Monroe-level scrutiny as the new ethical bar for AI systems. For a while, Thalassa allowed the movement to breathe without her direct voice. She stepped back from interviews, declined panels, and refocused on the work, building the PRISM Accountability Initiative into a powerful engine for change. Yet amidst the forward momentum, echoes from the past continued to arrive. Some came cloaked in shame, others in defiance, but a few carried something rarer: remorse-seeking understanding. One morning, a pale envelope appeared in her mailbox, handwritten in neat, looping script. There was no return address. Inside, a letter unfolded slowly in her hands. "Dear Dr. Monroe, I don't expect forgiveness, but I must ask for it anyway. My name is Celine Harper. I was the flight attendant who first questioned your seat assignment. I was the one who asked if you were lost. That moment has haunted me every day since." Thalassa paused, her breath catching. She remembered Celine, young, polite, the one who didn't scream but complied. The letter continued. "When I saw the footage leak, I cried. Not because I was caught, but because I saw myself doing what had once been done to me. 10 years ago, I applied for the airline's management track. I had a perfect record, but I was told I was better suited to guest-facing roles. I learned later from a sympathetic supervisor that my application had been filtered out by an internal flag. Same system, same bias. I was deemed too confrontational looking for corporate leadership. I buried that humiliation. And when PrismX came in, I didn't resist. I told myself it wasn't my place, that I needed the job, that it was above my pay grade. But then I saw you, and I heard my voice say the words I once heard used on me. Are you lost? You weren't. I was. I'm so sorry. The letter ended with a simple line. I no longer work for the airline. I now train hospitality staff in ethical protocols. But that moment lives with me. Thank you for holding the line when the rest of us did not. Thalassa folded the letter carefully, returned it to the envelope, and placed it in a drawer with similar letters, each one a brick in the slow road to redemption. It wasn't the only message she received that week. The most surprising came in the form of a personal email with a subject line that simply read, "I was wrong." The sender was Randall Price, the airline CEO. It was brief, direct, and unlike any of the corporate messaging that had flooded the airwaves in the weeks after the verdict. He asked for a private meeting. Thalassa debated. He had presided over the very culture that buried her, that shredded the footage, that authorized the profiling. But she agreed on one condition: the meeting would be filmed and released unedited. He accepted. 2 days later, in a neutral media space, cameras rolling, Randall sat opposite her, not with lawyers, not with handlers, but alone. He looked thinner, his tailored suit hanging a little looser, his eyes marked by sleeplessness. "I came here today," he began, "because I needed to say something without legal framing. No spin, no PR." He looked her in the eyes. "We failed you. I failed you. I knew PrismX had concerns, but I let the tech people handle it. I told myself it wasn't my job to challenge the math, but I knew what it was doing. I saw the data. I signed off anyway." Thalassa didn't interrupt. She waited. "You tried to warn us. And instead of listening, we mocked your report. I mocked it. I said you were too theoretical, too idealistic. And then we turned your name into a flag. I can't undo that, but I can choose what I do now." He pulled out a printed document. "I've tendered my resignation, effective immediately. I've also submitted a formal statement to the Department of Justice offering to testify in support of the Monroe Algorithmic Rights Act. I don't deserve credit for that. I deserve to be remembered as the man who didn't stop it. But I'd like to do one thing right." Thalassa studied him, not with vindication, but with the still weight of a woman who had long since abandoned rage. "You can't fix the system you allowed to thrive," she said, "but you can help dismantle it." He nodded. The video of their meeting went viral, not because of the resignation, but because of her poise, her clarity, her refusal to reduce accountability to apology. That same week, a judge signed an order to freeze PrismX permanently and mandated the airline to dismantle all related systems under third-party supervision. Other airlines, sensing the wind, followed. The FAA introduced strict transparency laws. The Monroe Act passed unanimously in the Senate and was signed into law under bipartisan acclaim. It established the first national framework for algorithmic transparency in customer-facing AI, mandating human oversight, external audits, and real-time redress protocols for flagged individuals. In the years that followed, Thalassa continued to lead the initiative. Her name became synonymous with digital civil rights. Universities taught her case. Civil rights organizations modeled after her nonprofit. She never returned to corporate consulting. She said she had seen too much to be comfortable in quiet rooms again. But every so often, she would receive a message, not from lawyers or journalists, but from ordinary people who had been flagged, ignored, humiliated, and then, thanks to her, vindicated. One was from a teacher who had once been denied a loan by a bank using a similar AI profiling system, and later won her own case using Monroe Act provisions. Another from a young woman stopped at an airport whose complaint was now formally reviewed thanks to new protocols modeled after Thalassa's lawsuit. And then, one day, she received a message from an 11-year-old girl. It was written in bright pink marker, scanned into an email by her mother. It read, "Dear Dr. Monroe, my mom says you made the rules fair. When I grow up, I want to fix the rules too." Thalassa read the message, sat back in her chair, and closed her eyes. She had begun her journey in silence, kneeling on a floor not meant for her, erased by a system that didn't see her humanity. She had spoken not in screams, but in facts, in code, in courage. And in doing so, she hadn't just reclaimed her name. She had made space for millions of others to never lose theirs. Justice had not come as a flame or a storm. It had come as a mirror, lifted toward the powerful, forcing them to see what they had built. And some, finally, had chosen to change. That, she thought, is redemption, not forgiveness without consequence, but consequence that leads to truth. And truth, at last, had been served. The end. If you found this story gripping and meaningful, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps us bring more powerful narratives like this to you. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think of Thalassa's journey? Which moment hit you the hardest? And where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, and let's talk about the story, justice, and what redemption really means.